The year is 1850. The place, England. A time of great invention, great ambition, and even greater incompetence. This is the story of the Bigglethwaite and Upper Wallop High Lowland Railway. Imagine the rolling hills of Yorkshire and a tiny dot named Bigglethwaite. Never heard of it? No one has. It's a place where sheep outnumber people, and the annual ferret racing competition is the highlight. Hold on to your hats because things are about to get wild. This is the story of a railway so hilariously inept it could only exist in British comedy. At the heart of this farce is our engineer, Mr. Peregrine Featherington-Gripe. Brilliant with gadgets, but absent-minded.
Legend has it he once tried to build a bridge out of gingerbread.
He was a walking health hazard, but could design a locomotive. When tasked with plotting the railway, eyebrows were raised. Whispers of "he'll end up in Scotland" echoed through the halls. Consulting a map while enjoying a picnic, a stray sausage roll obscured a crucial landmark. Before you could say "Bob's your uncle," the railway was headed in the wrong direction. Any sensible engineer would have stopped, consulted a compass. But not Peregrine, he was possessed. The railway chugged forth, a testament to one man's commitment to a wrong turn. The destination? Grimsby East, a place with no need for a railway. Before delving into the chaos, we must meet the other key players. Investors, managers, and the unfortunate souls tricked into working on this railway to nowhere. The construction was a sight to behold, if by behold you mean watch with amusement and concern. Peregrine drew up plans on a napkin during a game of darts. The contract for locomotives went to Dodge and Leggett, a name that inspired little confidence. Dodge, the brains, and Leggett, a man of few words. Their masterpiece was a fleet of 4 steam locomotives built in the 040 configuration.
Why choose between carrying water or coal when you can carry both?
Leggett saw the flaw, but Dodge waved away his concerns. The locomotives, christened with grand names, were a sight to behold, painted in eye-searing green with bright yellow wheels. Engineers complained they were as stable as a drunken unicycle. The whistles sounded like distressed geese. But Dodge and Leggett were undeterred. They believed they had created the pinnacle of locomotive engineering. The carriages were an eclectic bunch. Arthur Thattledew and Company oversaw their design with frugality. 2 first-class carriages had 2 more windows than third class. 8 third-class carriages had hard wooden benches and shed splinters. The peasant-class carriages were glorified cattle trucks with hay. A sign read, "Please refrain from spitting unless absolutely necessary." Who would invest in a railway destined to fail? Peregrine had a certain charm. He could talk a chicken into buying a one-way ticket to a vegetarian festival. He hosted lavish dinners, plying investors with fine wines and tales of untold riches. He spoke of connecting bustling metropolises and transporting valuable goods. The railway would be the envy of the world, or at least the neighboring village. Peregrine wasn't just persuasive, he was shrewd. Enter Cecil Higginbottom and George Osgood. Cecil saw the railway as his ticket to fame, George as an opportunity for creative accounting. Together they hatched a plan involving bribery. They targeted Tory members of Parliament known for their love of investments. The plan was simple, elegant, and utterly illegal. With Parliament's blessing, construction began in earnest. Cecil, now in charge, made illogical decisions. He hired his ukulele-playing nephew as head of signalling. He set station clocks 10 minutes ahead, causing mass confusion. George turned the company accounts into abstract art. Entries included miscellaneous expenses, mostly brandy, and research and development of new brandy cocktails. The wheels started to come off, literally. Locomotives were as stable as a drunken giraffe on roller skates. Derailments became common. Carriages shed parts and received poor reviews. The track twisted and turned unnecessarily. The grand opening approached, and the comedy of errors descended into farce. Section 1. The Grand Opening, a day of pomp, circumstance and near disaster. The grand opening of the Bigglethwaite and Upper Wallop High Lowland Railway was upon them, a day for celebration, for back-patting, for speeches so long and winding that they could rival the railway line itself. A brass band had been hired, their uniforms slightly more in tune than their instruments. Bunting, bravely battling a stiff Yorkshire breeze, fluttered optimistically. And Cecil, resplendent in a top hat that added a good foot to his already impressive height, beamed with a confidence that could only be described as completely unwarranted.
The guest of honour was none other than Sir Reginald Crumpet Smythe, the very Tory MP whose palm had been greased with the promise of a sizable donation to his Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Overcooked Vegetables.
Sir Reginald, a man who believed that any problem could be solved with a good monocle adjustment and a stiff upper lip, surveyed the proceedings with an air of bemused detachment. The speeches commenced, each one a masterpiece of rambling incoherence and thinly veiled self-congratulation. Peregrine, for once, kept his remarks brief, mostly because he was distracted by a particularly fascinating cloud formation that he believed resembled a giant tea cosy.
Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, the ceremonial first journey. Sir Reginald, with a grimace that suggested he'd rather be back in Parliament debating the merits of turnip-based currency, boarded the lead carriage christened the Flying Yorkshireman. Cecil, his grin wider than a railway gauge, gave the signal, and the engine, with a mighty hiss and a cloud of smoke that would make a dragon proud, lurched forward. Well, almost.
Section 2 Life on the Bigglethwaite Express, a bumpy ride to nowhere. The journey, much like the railway itself, was an exercise in controlled chaos. The locomotives, prone to bouts of wheezing and unpredictable bursts of speed, rattled along the tracks with all the grace of a drunken rhinoceros on roller skates. Passengers, clinging to their hats and their breakfasts, were treated to a bone-jarring ride that was less a leisurely journey and more a test of their ability to withstand G-forces usually reserved for astronauts. The scenery, what little could be glimpsed between bouts of violent swaying, was, well, Yorkshire. Rolling hills, sheep, the occasional bewildered-looking cow, and more sheep. Not exactly the breathtaking vistas that Peregrine had promised in his brochures, but then again, he'd probably drawn those from memory while enjoying a pint or two at the local pub. The stops along the route were equally memorable, mostly for their utter lack of anything resembling a station. Passengers were often deposited in the middle of fields, next to rivers, or, in one unfortunate instance, directly in front of a rather surprised-looking bull. And then there was the food. The catering contract had gone to Cecil's brother-in-law, a man whose culinary skills peaked at boiling water and whose signature dish was something he called surprise stew, which usually involved whatever leftovers he could find in the back of his pantry. Passengers, if they knew what was good for them, brought their own picnics.
Back at headquarters, if you could call my increasingly chaotic office that, the financial situation was deteriorating faster than the railway tracks after a particularly heavy downpour.
My pockets were bulging with receipts for essential business meetings held mostly in the saloon bar of the local pub. I continued to work my accounting magic, making expenses disappear and reappear like rabbits in a particularly confusing magic trick.
The investors, initially blinded by Peregrine's charm and the promise of untold riches, were starting to ask difficult questions like, why is the train always late, and why does the balance sheet smell like brandy?
I would wave my hands, mumble something about teething problems and unforeseen circumstances, and then quickly change the subject to my favourite topic, my extensive collection of novelty walking sticks.
The staff, unpaid and increasingly disillusioned, began to seek alternative employment opportunities, mostly involving fleeing the country or joining travelling circuses. The head of signalling, Cecil's ukulele-playing nephew, ran off with a milkmaid and a suitcase full of company funds, leaving behind nothing but a hastily scribbled note that read, Gone to seek my fortune. P.S. The signal box is haunted. And then, as if the gods of comedy themselves had decided to intervene, the rains came. Not just any rain, mind you, but a torrential downpour of biblical proportions, the kind of rain that made Noah look like an amateur. Rivers overflowed, fields turned into lakes, and the sheep, well, they just looked rather damp. The Bigglethwaite and Upper Wallop High Lowland Railway, already on its last legs, or rather wheels, simply couldn't cope. The tracks, hastily laid and poorly maintained, were washed away like so much soggy spaghetti. Bridges crumbled, embankments dissolved, and the entire railway line, in a symphony of splintering wood and twisted metal, began to disappear beneath a torrent of muddy water. The end, when it came, was swift and mercilessly comical. The Flying Yorkshireman, carrying a grand total of 3 passengers, a travelling salesman, a vicar with a severe case of indigestion, and a rather bewildered-looking sheepdog, found itself stranded in the middle of what had once been a field and was now a rapidly expanding lake. The locomotive, with a final mournful wheeze, gave up the ghost, its boiler expiring with a sound like 1,000 deflating whoopee cushions. The passengers, soaked to the bone and thoroughly fed up with the whole sorry affair, waded to shore, vowing never to set foot on a train again. And so the Bigglethwaite and Upper Wallop High Lowland Railway, a monument to mismanagement, incompetence, and a healthy dose of bad luck, breathed its last. The dream was over, washed away by the rain and the sheer weight of its own absurdity. News of the Bigglethwaite and Upper Wallop High Lowland Railway's demise spread faster than a runaway tea trolley down a steep hill. Investors, upon hearing that their dreams of riches had gone the way of the dodo, or perhaps the soggy biscuit, fainted in drawing rooms across the country.
Sensing that the game was up, I did what any self-respecting captain of industry would do in such a situation. I blamed the weather, packed my bags with my collection of novelty walking sticks, and hopped on the next train out of Yorkshire.
I did the same, with a suitcase full of emergency brandy, leaving behind a trail of unpaid bills and bewildered sheep.
With the company officially bankrupt and the directors nowhere to be found, the task of dealing with the wreckage fell to a beleaguered solicitor named Mr. Bartholomew Quill, a man who looked remarkably like a startled owl, and whose grasp on the concept of humour was tenuous at best. Mr. Quill, faced with the daunting task of liquidating the railway's assets, which consisted mostly of 4 rather damp locomotives, a collection of dilapidated carriages, and a mountain of debt, decided that a practical approach was needed. He would sell what he could, scrap what he couldn't, and try to forget that the whole sorry saga had ever happened. From Iron Horse to Iron Kettle, the locomotive's second act. The locomotives, once the pride of Bigglethwaite, or at least the loudest things in Bigglethwaite, were deemed too cumbersome and unreliable to be of much use to anyone. The pride of Bigglethwaite, after a brief stint as a children's climbing frame, which ended abruptly when a group of over-enthusiastic youngsters managed to get it rolling down a hill, was sold for scrap to a man who planned to melt it down and turn it into commemorative teaspoons, which sadly never materialized. The Upper Wallop Wanderer fared slightly better, finding a new lease on life as a stationary engine in a pickle factory, where its tendency to wheeze and sputter was seen as an asset, adding a certain je ne sais quoi to the pickling process. The Grimsby Gambler, which ironically had never actually made it within 100 miles of Grimsby, ended up in the possession of a travelling showman who painted it gold, rechristened it the Iron Leviathan, and passed it off as the 8th wonder of the world, much to the amusement of anyone who had ever actually seen the real 8th wonder of the world. And then there was Doris. Poor dear Doris, the locomotive that nobody seemed to want or understand, was last seen languishing in a farmer's field, slowly rusting away and serving as a rather elaborate bird bath. Whispers on, the Yorkshire Wind Legends and Legacy, the carriages, deemed even less useful than the locomotives, were auctioned off to the highest bidders, most of whom turned out to be local farmers looking for cheap chicken coops, tool sheds, or, in one instance, a rather unusual summer house. And so the Bigglethwaite and Upper Wallop High Lowland Railway faded into obscurity, its tracks disappearing beneath fields of wildflowers and its memory kept alive only in the whispers of the locals who would gather in the pub on cold winter nights and regale each other with tales of its absurdity.
They spoke of Peregrine Featherington-Gripe, the engineer who could get lost in his own backyard, and his grand plans that went awry in the most spectacular fashion. They recounted the misadventures of Cecil and George, the Laurel and Hardy of railway management, whose incompetence knew no bounds. And they laughed about the time the Flying Yorkshireman, on its maiden voyage, derailed because a particularly large rabbit had decided to take a nap on the tracks.
A toast to disaster. Remembering the Bigglethwaite Way, the Bigglethwaite and Upper Wallop High Lowland Railway. A testament to the triumph of hope over experience, the victory of ambition over common sense, a shining example of how not to run a railway, or indeed any business, had become a legend, a cautionary tale, a joke with a punchline that never quite got old. And so, dear viewers, as we raise a glass of brandy in honor of George, to the memory of the Bigglethwaite and Upper Wallop High Lowland Railway, let us remember that sometimes, just sometimes, it's the failures, the fiascos, the utter disasters that make life truly memorable. Years passed, decades even. The world moved on, wars were fought, empires crumbled, trousers got tighter, then looser, then tighter again. It's a fickle business fashion. And the memory of the Bigglethwaite and Upper Wallop High Lowland Railway, like a fading photograph tucked away in a dusty attic, began to dim. The tracks, once a testament to Peregrine's wayward vision, were ripped up, repurposed into fences, farm gates, and rumour has it, a rather ambitious and surprisingly sturdy garden shed. Nature, ever the pragmatist, reclaimed the embankments, transforming them into verdant corridors where rabbits hopped, badgers burrowed, and the occasional fox pondered the futility of grandiose schemes. The villages that the railway had promised to connect, but never quite managed to reach, continued about their business, their inhabitants none the wiser and perhaps a little bit wealthier for their brief brush with railway-induced chaos. Bigglethwaite, true to form, remained a sleepy backwater, its inhabitants more concerned with the annual sheepdog trials than with the ghosts of locomotives past. But memories like spilled tea have a way of lingering. And in the cosy pubs of Yorkshire, where ale flowed freely and tall tales grew taller with each retelling, the legend of the Bigglethwaite and Upper Wallop High Lowland Railway lived on.
It became a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most well-intentioned plans could go hilariously wrong. It was a story told to wide-eyed grandchildren, a warning against the dangers of unchecked ambition, poor planning, and of course, soggy maps.
The names of Peregrine Featherington-Gripe, Cecil Higginbottom, and George Osgood, especially George and his legendary brandy budget, were passed down through generations, not as villains or failures, but as figures of folklore, their incompetence a source of endless amusement and head-shaking wonder. What lessons, you might ask, can we learn from the shambolic tale of the Bigglethwaite and Upper Wallop High Lowland Railway? What pearls of wisdom can we glean from this symphony of mismanagement and misplaced enthusiasm? Well, for starters, always double-check your maps, especially if you've recently consumed a large picnic basket full of pork pies, and perhaps be wary of investing in any venture that involves a man named Peregrine, with a penchant for oversized spectacles and a tendency to get lost in his own daydreams. But perhaps the most important lesson, the one that transcends time, tea stains, and even the most spectacular of railway disasters, is this. Life is too short to be taken too seriously. Sometimes it's best to embrace the chaos, to laugh at the absurdity of it all, and to find joy in the knowledge that even the most well-laid plans can, and often do, go gloriously, hilariously off the rails. So, the next time you find yourself delayed by a train, frustrated by a detour, or simply bewildered by the sheer incompetence of the world around you, spare a thought for the Bigglethwaite and Upper Wallop High Lowland Railway. Remember their grand ambitions, their spectacular failures, and their enduring ability to make us smile even as we shake our heads in disbelief. And who knows, perhaps, just perhaps, somewhere out there in a world where maps are perpetually soggy, engineers are prone to flights of fancy, and brandy is considered a legitimate business expense, the spirit of the Bigglethwaite Express lives on, chugging merrily along the tracks of our collective imagination.